The conference call had been running for 20 minutes when I finally understood what was happening. I was dialed in from my home office. We were still doing hybrid that quarter, and I had my camera off because I'd been up since 5:30 finishing the slide notes for what I thought was going to be my presentation. I had submitted the deck to our shared drive 2 days earlier. I had a Slack message from my manager that said, "Great work, this is exactly what we needed." And then my coworker started talking, and he used the phrase patient journey ecosystem, which I had coined in a Confluence doc 3 weeks before and genuinely believed no one else on the team had bothered to read. He said it the way you say a phrase you've been using for years. I unmuted myself once. I asked a clarifying question about a number I knew he was about to get wrong. He answered smoothly, thanked me by name, and continued. Then I muted myself again, and I sat very still in my chair, and I listened to him deliver 18 months of my work to the executive team as though it had emerged naturally from some collective brainstorming process I hadn't known we were having. It hadn't emerged from anywhere except my own research, my own late evenings, my own documents, and I had the timestamps to prove every single part of it. My name is Valerie. Most people call me Val. I was 34 years old when this happened, and I had been a senior product manager at Cornerstone Health Technologies for just under 2 years, long enough to understand how the company worked, not quite long enough to have built the kind of professional insulation that protects you from certain kinds of betrayal. Cornerstone was a healthcare SaaS company out of Nashville, about 200 employees at that point, freshly closed on their Series C round. We built tools that helped hospital systems and outpatient practices improve patient engagement, follow-up care compliance, appointment adherence, communication between providers and patients during high-risk recovery periods. The clients were serious institutions, regional hospital networks, integrated health systems, and they demanded rigor. That suited me fine. I had always worked best when precision was required. The work I was building was called the Patient Activation Framework. It was a research-backed product methodology for improving outcomes on our platform. How we segmented patient populations based on health condition, demographics, and behavioral data. How we constructed engagement sequences tailored to those segments. How we defined and measured activation rates and fed the results back into the product roadmap. I had done the research myself. 62 user interviews with patients and care coordinators across 3 hospital systems. 14 months of iteration. An 8,000-word Confluence document with embedded data models, a methodology appendix citing published health equity research, and a glossary of terms I had developed specifically because the existing industry vocabulary didn't capture what I was describing precisely enough. Patient journey ecosystem, activation-weighted segmentation, cohort stratification by compliance risk profile. I made those phrases up because I needed them. They were not decorative. They were the names I gave to real specific things. My coworker had been at Cornerstone for 5 years. I want to be careful about how I describe him because the easy version, the story where he was simply a villain, flattened something that was actually more instructive. He was not without ability. He was genuinely skilled at the parts of this work that I found the most draining. The political navigation, the executive relationship management, the art of making leadership feel like they were driving decisions they had actually been guided toward. He remembered people's details. He asked the right questions in all-hands meetings. He had a gift for making whoever he was talking to feel specifically seen, and that gift had carried him a long way. What he was not good at was building things from scratch. What he was good at was acquiring proximity to people who did, and then absorbing what he found there. He asked to be kept in the loop on my enterprise strategy work. I invited him into the early documentation process because he was my colleague, and because I thought his instinct for executive communication would be useful when it came time to present. When he asked me to walk him through the thinking before the quarterly review, just so he could field questions if any came up from leadership, I said yes. I sent him a 4,400-word Slack message in October that laid out the complete patient cohort methodology, the research basis, the segmentation logic, the activation model, the implementation structure. I sent it because he asked. I sent it because I thought we were on the same team. I have that Slack message saved. I have the timestamp. I have the entire thread. The quarterly product review happened on a Thursday in February. My coworker had apparently asked my manager if he could co-present the strategy deck, explaining that he'd been closely involved in the enterprise product direction. My manager agreed. She didn't mention this to me before the call. I don't know what version of events she had been given. What I know is that he presented my framework for 37 minutes, barely paused for questions, said our framework 9 times. I started counting around the third and walked out of that meeting with the executive team's full confidence and my intellectual work in his professional portfolio. I counted 9 because I needed something precise to hold on to. When the call ended, I had 4 Slack notifications. 3 from colleagues congratulating the strong presentation, 1 from my manager that said he really brought it home today. My name was not mentioned in any of them. I sat in my home office for about 40 minutes, very still, and I made a decision. I did not type a single word for 2 hours. When I finally started typing, it was not an email to my manager or a message to anyone on my team. What I typed was the name of a folder on my personal drive. Q1 Strategy Notes. I knew what not to do because I had watched what happened to women at companies like ours who moved too quickly on something like this. The year before, a colleague on the design team had raised a similar concern, professionally, clearly, without drama, and had spent the next 6 months being quietly described in meeting rooms as difficult, emotionally reactive, unable to see the bigger picture. She was smart and thorough and completely right, and none of it protected her. She eventually left for somewhere she could start fresh. I did not want to start fresh. I had built something genuinely valuable at Cornerstone, and I was going to collect what it was worth to me. On my own terms, on my own timeline. So instead of confronting him, I built an archive. Every Google Doc with its full version history visible. Every Confluence page, screenshot at the level where the timestamps appeared. The full Slack thread from October, every message in it with dates and times clear. I pulled file metadata where I could get it. I organized all of it chronologically in a simple index document. Then I put the folder away and went back to doing my job. The promotion came the following week. My coworker was named Director of Product. The announcement landed in the company-wide Slack on a Tuesday, warm and celebratory, and it cited the patient activation framework as the strategic achievement that had positioned our enterprise business for growth. The word he used in his personal thank you reply was driving. He was most proud of the work he'd been driving. I read that word in the parking garage of our office building during my lunch break, sitting alone in my car, because I needed to be somewhere I could let my face do whatever it was trying to do without anyone seeing it. That afternoon, I met with my manager and asked about my own development path. She was kind about it. She said my contributions were valued. She said the next review cycle was a few months out. She said the current structure offered real growth opportunity for someone with my skills. I nodded through all of it and said thank you and went back to my desk, and when I got there I added 2 more documents to the Q1 Strategy Notes folder. Over the following 9 months, my coworker and I worked alongside each other in the professional way you do when you have decided not to fight a battle you're not yet positioned to win. He was friendly. He would check in occasionally, send the kind of warm Slack messages that read like ordinary collegiality. I was warm back, I was also watching. There was a meeting about 4 months in, with our VP of Sales and 2 account managers, reviewing the enterprise pitch deck, where a question came up about whether our patient cohort segmentation had been validated against Medicaid populations, or only commercial insurance patients. I knew the answer. It was on page 17 of the methodology appendix I had written. The answer was that the initial model had been built on commercial data, but I had included a Medicaid adaptation protocol in the appendix specifically because I had known this question would come up in enterprise sales conversations. My coworker answered vaguely. He said we'd looked at diverse patient populations and pivoted to an outcome slide. The account managers moved on. I said nothing. That evening I sent myself a brief summary email. Who was in the meeting, what had been asked, what had been said, and what the accurate answer was. 2 paragraphs, date and time in the subject line. I had a colleague in our solutions engineering team, I'll call him Tom, who had been at Cornerstone longer than either of us, and who had been in the early planning sessions, where my framework was first introduced to the broader team. About 5 months after the promotion, over coffee in the break room, he told me quietly that he knew what had happened. He didn't make a production of it. He just said, I remember those early sessions. I remember who was doing the explaining. I told him I appreciated it, and I left it at that. But I noted it. Sometimes the record of who was in which room and what they witnessed becomes relevant in ways you can't predict. The patient activation framework was by then everywhere in the company. It was in the enterprise pitch deck, the investor materials, the language the sales team used on prospect calls. The enterprise pipeline had grown significantly on the strength of it. And the largest opportunity in that pipeline, by a wide margin, was a hospital network in Tennessee with a potential contract value of just over $2 million in annual recurring revenue. A deal that size would be the largest in Cornerstone's history. 7 months into my coworker's tenure as director, the Tennessee account started showing serious stress. Here's the thing about building a house on someone else's foundation. You don't know where the load-bearing walls are. I had designed the framework to be implemented by someone who understood why every decision in it had been made the way it was made. The patient cohort segmentation wasn't arbitrary. The activation sequencing wasn't a template you could swap out. The whole structure had internal logic that ran deep, rooted in specific health equity research, adapted through months of iteration against real patient behavior data. If you knew the surface, you could demo it beautifully. If you didn't know the foundation, you eventually hit a wall you couldn't talk your way around. The wall came in the form of the Tennessee Clinical Informatics team. I heard about it first from Tom over lunch. The client had started asking pointed methodology questions. They wanted to understand the research basis for our cohort segmentation. They wanted to know whether the model could be adapted for their specific patient population, which was predominantly Medicaid covered. They had asked to speak with, as they put it, the person who actually built this. I heard it again a few days later from an account manager who pulled me aside before a staff meeting. She was genuinely worried. She said the conversations were getting into territory she didn't think our director of product could navigate. I said very little to either of them. I went back to my desk and kept working. About a week later, I received a calendar invite from our chief product officer. The subject line said only Val, checking in, no agenda. When I went to her office, she closed the door. She was direct. The Tennessee deal was in serious jeopardy. The client had used the phrase, technical credibility concerns, in their most recent call. She had gone back over the original product documentation in the past several days, the Confluence pages, the research appendix, and she had some questions she wanted to ask me directly. I let her say everything she wanted to say. Then I asked her one question. What role are you thinking for me on this? We'd want you to provide technical support to the enterprise team, she said. Help fill in some of the gaps. I shook my head slowly. I'm not able to do this as a support function, I said. If you want me involved in saving this account, I need to come in as product lead. That needs to be in writing. Title, scope, decision authority, before I open a single file or sit in on a single call. She looked at me for a moment, then she said, that's fair. Give me a day. She came back in 12 hours. The offer was in my inbox the next morning, title and scope clearly defined, signed by both her and our CEO. That evening, I composed one email, 2 paragraphs. No emotion, no accusations, nothing that could be read as grievance. I told our CPO I wanted to make sure she had complete historical context on the patient activation framework before we moved into the recovery work. I attached the original Confluence documentation with full version history, the October Slack thread, the phone 400-word message, date and time visible, and the chronological index from the folder I'd been quietly maintaining for 9 months. I requested a read receipt. Then I pressed send and made myself a cup of tea and sat in my kitchen for a while, and I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a very long time. My coworker came to my desk the following morning. He sat down across from me with the posture of someone who is prepared for a version of this conversation in which he still comes out fine. I heard you're taking point on Tennessee, he said. I am, I said. That makes sense, he said. You know this framework better than anyone. You were so deep in the original research phase. I looked at him. I built the framework, I said, not just the research phase, the full methodology, the segmentation model, the activation logic, the documentation. All of it, start to finish. Something moved through his expression. We talked through a lot of the direction together, he said. You asked me to explain the patient cohort methodology to you in October, I said. I sent you 1,400 words in Slack walking through the complete logic, the research basis, the segmentation structure, the implementation rationale. I have that message. Our CPO has it now. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't think the full picture is as simple as that. You don't have to agree with my characterization, I said. Our CPO has the documentation. She'll draw her own conclusions. He stood up. He said something about hoping we could remain collaborative. I said I intended to remain professional. He left, and I turned back to my screen, and I noticed that my hands were completely steady. The internal review that followed was handled the way serious companies handle these things when the paper trail is clear, quietly and efficiently. HR reviewed the materials alongside the performance records from the past year. Our CPO reviewed them. Within about 2 weeks, my coworker was moved to a different product line. Internal operations tools, well away from the enterprise track. 2 members of his team left in the weeks following. I was told they had difficulty adapting to the project's new standards. I didn't need to know the specifics beyond that. I had 8 weeks to save the Tennessee account. I brought in Tom and one other solutions engineer I had watched work and trusted fully, and we went directly into the Medicaid adaptation problem that the client had been raising. We pulled the original segmentation model and ran it against their patient population data. We built and tested the adaptation protocol I had included in the methodology appendix 14 months earlier. The one written specifically because I had anticipated this question would arise in enterprise conversations. The framework held. It had always been built to hold. We reconstructed the implementation roadmap, documented every methodological decision in the client-facing materials so their clinical informatics team could follow the reasoning themselves, and we came in slightly under the revised project budget. When we presented to the Tennessee Health Network, I led the call, not in a supporting role, the lead. Their clinical team asked questions for over an hour, detailed, specific, the kind of questions that require you to know not just what the framework does, but why every element of it was designed the way it was. I answered from memory, from research, from 2 years of work that had made me the only person capable of answering them with any real authority. Near the end of the call, their chief medical officer asked me directly, "Who developed the original framework?" "I did," I said. She nodded slowly. "That explains quite a lot," she said. "We had begun to wonder." The contract was signed 11 weeks later. Just over $2 million in annual recurring revenue. The largest enterprise deal in Cornerstone's history. Our CEO mentioned it in the company-wide newsletter. My name was in the second sentence. 6 months after that, I was promoted to Director of Product. I still have the folder on my personal drive, labeled Q1 Strategy Notes. I haven't opened it in a long time, but it's there, the way a certain kind of preparedness stays with you after you've needed it once. Not anxiety, just the calm and settled knowledge that you know where things are and exactly what they say. My coworker left Cornerstone within the year. Through the professional networks, these things travel. LinkedIn updates, mutual connections, the quiet information that flows between people who've worked in the same industry. I heard he'd landed a director-level role at a software company in another city. I bear him no particular ill will at this point. The anger I carried was real and it was earned, and it also cost me more sustained energy than it ever cost him, which is a truth I accepted slowly and without any particular grace, but eventually in full. What I carried out of those months, and what I bring into every project I lead now, is less a lesson about revenge than a craft principle I intend to keep. The person who seems to build things can only travel so far before the building has to actually stand on its own. When the structure starts to wobble, when a client asks a question that can only be answered by someone who knows where the load-bearing walls are, no amount of relationship skill and executive presence fills that gap. The building either holds or it doesn't. And the person who designed it is the only person who knows for certain which one it will do. Document your work. Know where your files are. Build things that are actually real. And when someone starts using your terminology in a presentation like they invented it, start counting. Precision gives you something solid to hold on to when everything else is noise. I always count. I always know exactly what the number is.